This video is an introduction to gender diversity and being transgender. Now, to understand gender diversity, we must first understand what we mean by gender. When we talk about gender, we are referring to the small differences that have evolved in our brains which produce the natural behaviours and responses we each use to support our identity and roles in nature. Gender exists throughout nature and is the subject of many a David Attenborough documentary. The stag's rut, the ducks protect her ducklings. Each of us has a unique set of these differences and behaviours, a gender personality, from which we develop our gender identity, the mental image we have of ourselves, and our gender presentation, the way we present ourselves to the world. Gender personalities are extremely diverse and result in a spectrum of gender identities. Our society has chosen to split this spectrum into two distinct gender categories, male and female, but gender itself is not actually binary. It is bimodal. That is, there are two peaks under which most people fall. However, everyone has characteristics that might be considered belong to the other side, while, more importantly, people exist between these peaks. Because of this, many societies choose to divide gender differently. Some have or are moving to 3, while some Native American tribes have 5 genders. Societies also assign rules to these gender categories, clothing, behaviours, roles, and so on. But these are neither definitive nor fixed. For example, 100 years ago, it was pink for a boy and blue for a girl. It is important to note here that gender and sex are not the same, nor necessarily related. Our gender is the core set of software programs we use to take in and respond to the world. Our sex is the computer hardware that we use to produce offspring. Because sex and gender both exist on bimodal spectrums that roughly align, we associate them together, especially at birth, where we use an assessment of sex to assume a gender. However, neither may be right. Driven by evolution, diversity is essential to all life, and without it we wouldn't exist. Gender diversity is just a natural and necessary part of this. Those of us whose brain wiring and gender identity falls under the peak opposite to that assumed from our sex are transgender. Those of us whose wiring and gender identity falls in the middle are called non-binary and do not readily associate with either or sometimes fluctuate between them. Contrary to popular belief, we understand much about the biology that gives rise to gender diversity and transgender individuals, and have the results of many scientific studies to support this. Sex differentiation happens early on in fetal development, driven by a combination of genes and hormones. Gender development happens at a much later stage, driven by hormones acting on the brain. Variation in hormone activity between these two stages, too much or too little of a hormone, results in gender-sex diversity and incongruence. This means we are born this way, and you cannot make or coax anyone into being transgender, choose, pretend, or become transgender. Equally, it is not something we grow out of or can be cured of. It's just a natural biological condition, like being tall. We may have co-concurrent conditions, but the important message here is that being gender incongruent or transgender is not an illness, is not something you become, and is never a choice. Gender diversity is not uncommon or anything new. We have historical records that date back at least 5,000 years, and there was even a Roman emperor, Aragbalus, who it seems was transgender. Research suggests many have some degree of gender incongruence, with up to 1 in 100 being transgender. But we don't really know the numbers as many remain hidden. Transgender men, that is female to male, are as common as transgender women, male to female, while there are slightly fewer who currently identify as non-binary. But the numbers are growing as more of us come forward. This is not a trend or a fad, as some suggest, but the result of us being able to access good information and learn from others via the internet. Being gender incongruent affects every part of our lives. Being different and trying to be something we are not is hugely challenging. It causes us distress called gender dysphoria. The degree of dysphoria each of us feels varies. For some of us it is mild and may be alleviated by partial or occasional presentation as the opposite gender. But for many of us the dysphoria is severe and leads to depression, self-harm, substance abuse, and, at around 40% and 10 times the national average, the highest attempted suicide rate for any single group of people. Being gender incongruent or transgender is not fun and not something any of us or anyone else would wish to be. Because we are born transgender, we become aware of our condition from early childhood, even if we don't fully understand it or have the words to describe it. While some of us rebel at an early age, many of us try to suppress and deny our gender issues and conform to expectations, often going to extreme lengths by joining the army or becoming Olympic athletes. We can keep our true selves hidden for many years, though this doesn't invalidate or diminish our gender incongruence. However, we often reach a point where we cannot continue the deception, and in order to survive, we seek help and come out. A common misconception is that our treatment is just about gender reassignment surgery. However, this is the last step in the process, and many of us undergo treatment and transition without ever having surgery. Because you cannot tell whether we've had it or not, it makes little difference to how we are accepted. Instead, our treatment starts with lengthy assessments of our gender incongruence and dysphoria by gender specialists. Ongoing psychological support remains part of the treatment, however we proceed. Because we cannot change the brain's hardwiring, the next steps involve helping us live in the right gender. Social transition, that is living in the correct gender role, comes next, and once we have done this, we may be given cross-sex hormones, the main medical treatment. These induce changes that make us physically more aligned to the appropriate sex, as well as, incidentally, causing infertility and loss of libido. We may also receive other treatments to support this: voice coaching, hair removal, mastectomy, etc. Only after some years living in role and on hormones will we be considered for reassignment surgery, which for male to female is roughly similar in cost to a hip replacement and more for a female to male. Treatment, though, is not something we can rush into, especially as the NHS services are heavily oversubscribed and waiting times are in years. And, of course, medical intervention is never undertaken until the need has been clearly established and after we have socially transitioned. Specialists also subscribe to the standards of care and treatment set by a world body of leading medical experts. As a result, regret rate, at less than 1%, is considerably lower than many other life-changing medical procedures, and even then is more often a result of social acceptance problems. While much attention is given to medical treatment, social transition is actually the harder part, because everything in our lives must change and is at risk of being lost. Our jobs, our friends, partners, family, homes, and social acceptance. There is so much to creating a new life, a mountain of social etiquette to be relearned and applied, all in an instant, and a mass of officialdom to get our gender change recognised in, for example, our passports and driving licences, and, ultimately, in our birth certificates. And, of course, getting social acceptance can be hugely challenging, especially from those with limited understanding of our condition. While we may encounter problems at our work or school, it is often those closest to us, our partners and family, whose support we need the most, who respond worst and reject us. Transitioning when adult can also cause big issues, as puberty can leave us with physical characteristics that are difficult to overcome. A deep voice, for example, while the treatments for these are generally not available on the NHS or affordable privately. This doesn't diminish the validity of our gender identity, though. The consequences of our condition, even before we come out, make us constant targets for bullying and verbal abuse throughout our lives. We also encounter very high levels of discrimination, hate crime, physical violence, domestic violence and murder. And while we are protected by many of the same laws as other groups, there are holes in the legislation. There are also groups who, for various ideological reasons, want to suppress us and who demonise us as a danger to society. The reality, though, is that they and society are a danger to us, not the other way round. We are incredibly diverse and we don't fit your stereotypes. We are every culture, every profession, every social background, every level of intelligence and every type of skill. We are pilots, scientists, IT experts, doctors, nurses, vets, teachers, writers, actors, musicians and so on. We are people who you interact with every day and who you probably aren't even aware of or notice. We also have a normal range of sexualities that don't substantially change with transitioning. Gender and sexuality are independent, but common issues and overlap amongst us have led to us forming a mutual LGBT community. We may have no choice in being gender incongruent or transgender, but you have a choice as to how you treat us, and that can make a big difference in our lives. So please do treat us normally like anyone else of the relevant gender. Learn about what we go through and where we are in the process. Recognise the challenges we face and be understanding. And please don't patronise us or ask personal questions without our permission. Think we are pretending to be a man or a woman. We're not. Use our old names, pronouns, or refer to our past selves as if they were real. We have only ever been the person we are now. We just kept it hidden. And finally, a palliative care nurse who recorded the most common regrets of the dying found that top of the list was, "I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me." Transgender people who come out have the courage to live their lives true to themselves, and that has surely got to be worth a little respect. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope it has helped your understanding of gender diversity and of those of us who are transgender.